Right. We come now to the Torah reading part of the service. We're going to begin with a personal prayer on page 169. Please rise as we open the ark. Compassionate Creator, teach me to appreciate the love of family and friends. May I not be a source of pain or contention, jealousy or needless competitiveness, but may I learn to listen to the heartfelt stirrings of all whom I know and love, and may I help fulfill their needs. Grant health of body and spirit to all. May your Torah fashion me into an instrument of your will and of your peace. Amen. Selah. We'll say our Misha Berach following learning some Torah this morning. All right. This week we're reading Parashat Noach. You can find it in your red Eitz Chaim on page 41. Parashat Noach contains two stories of destruction. The first, the story of the flood, is a general cataclysm that destroys life as we know it on earth. The second is the story of the destruction of one of the first centralized civilizations in history. The Torah wants us to know as a matter of first importance, here, right at the beginning of its instruction, that life on planet Earth and human civilization are delicate, even fragile. But God commands Noah to make the ark and to continue human life, and then he gives him a surprising command. Tzohar ta'aseh lateva. You shall make a light or a window for the ark. Noah, like us this year, is heading into the ark in order to save himself. Noah had to leave everything outside behind, and similarly, I've spoken to people who for months have been sheltering at home to make sure they're safe from the pandemic. And so both of us are sheltering, as it were, in a protective ark to get through this time. And yet some of the commentators ask, how could God tell Noah to put this light, this window, into the ark? Doesn't that jeopardize their safety? I mean, put a hole in the side of an ark? What if it capsizes? Or what if, far less bad, what if the water simply pours in? Now they're all left bailing water all the time. How could God command such a thing? Well, light, it seems, is so important for life that they must add a light, even to the structure of their protective ark. Noah is praised in extraordinary terms for his righteousness. So why does the Jewish tradition of commentary tend to look askew on his achievements? He did, after all, save all human life and all animal life on the planet. Because his achievements only affected within the human sphere himself and his family. He did not even begin to save his generation. He exercised instead no leadership. His righteousness seemed only to benefit himself. Now, look, because of him, all of us who are here have benefited, as we're all in fact descendants of Noah. He's sort of a second Adam in that sense. We're all descendants of Adam and of Noah. But he failed to reach his own generation. The Hasidim have a phrase for this. They call it tzaddik mit peltz, a tzaddik with a fur coat. You see, the phrase is drawing on the fact that on a cold night, there's at least two ways to warm yourself. You can put on a warm coat, or you can light a fire. The thing is, with the fur coat, only you stay warm. With the fire, others can also draw warmth for it. In our tradition, we are generally asked to light a fire. And we're trying to light a fire here at Bethel. I would say we're doing a pretty good job of it as well. We want to share the warmth of our tradition with others. We want to share an important and growing conversation in our house of learning with our whole community. The goal is not merely to get through this pandemic, as it were going into the ark, but to warm ourselves with the fire of Torah throughout this long, cold season. The second story of decline and destruction happens on a civilizational level. It's actually a much smaller scale, but it might feel bigger to us, the humans. This is less of a big deal than the tsunamis of raging water that swept away life on the land for Noah. But in chapter 11, we read another story of the story of Babel and the way that this civilization could not actually come together around their great building project. And right at the beginning of it, we learn, and the whole earth was of one language and of a common purpose. Or to be more literal in the translation, they had words of one. They had singular language, singular words, right? So language is at the center of this second story of civilizational decline. The commentator, the Netziv, tells us that this is by design, that the story begins with this focus on language. The rulers wanted all their people to speak in the same way. He hints that this was actually a coercive, almost statist quality in this centralized project of building a massive tower to reach the heavens. As Rashi points out in his commentary, the project fails because it's based on human hubris, pride, excessive pride, not understanding the limits of human capacity. When humans think that they are gods, according to Rashi, then the moral of the story is that God is happy to, quote, bring them back down to earth. Just like the Netziv is pointing out about the use of language, I also don't like it when people tell each other how they must speak. I believe deeply in free speech, and the Torah provides support for this from our Parsha. Yet free speech does not mean a license for irresponsible speech. It does not mean that speech has no consequences. Far from it. Speech is perhaps one of the things that has the greatest consequences in life. When our news sources are not fair-minded, neither can we be fair-minded. As we approach the election, I want to provide, we're just 2 weeks away from it, and I think many people will feel that the election kind of comes as a great cataclysmic event changing everything. And so I think this story of the ark is rather important for us to think through. And the story of the end of civilization with the Tower of Babel and the confusion that their attempted project brings is also crucial. I want to give you a few pointers as we approach this coming flood, certainly of emotions and perhaps also of information and debate, etc. Since our news sources are not always fair-minded, and we have a duty to be so and to speak so, please check your sources. Don't be swept up by mere confirmation bias. If confirmation bias is that simple error we make where we tend to believe things that fit with what we already believe and to dismiss everything else. It's very easy for all of us to fall prey to this, right? Instead, broaden your reading. Try to read briefly on each of the candidates that will be on your ballot, not just the top of the ticket. Another key thing to ask yourself as we come to the election is, what is the question we're actually being asked as we head to the polls to vote? I'm not sure that most people have any clarity about this. What is being asked of us as we vote? What's the question? What do you think it is? What's the question when you go to the poll? How can we go vote if we don't know the question? The question we're answering when we go to vote is what option here is for the common good. The question is not what is my preference. The question is not what is good for me. nor what is good for my group. It's instead what is good for the United States of America. This is a crucial distinction that we need to make. You're not merely being asked for a private opinion. The way that you make a decision when it comes to career, or the way that you make a decision when it comes to business, may have appropriately much more to do with private benefit. That is not the question when we act as voters. The question is, what is good for all of us? For our unity, for our freedom, for our Constitution, for the things to which we are committed as the people of the United States. Re-entering this way of thinking about the common good is a crucial prerogative in our national political life. And actually just plain old re-entering our common spaces is an urgent prerogative, urgent priority in our national life. Aristotle warned a long time ago, millennia ago, that democracy can easily slide into mere tyranny. In fact, he said it tended to do so, tyranny being the rule of one over all. How could it be that democracy, the rule of all, could turn in so easily into the rule of just one over all? He believed that placing power with the people, the sort of mass of people, tended to lead in this direction because the people have not so much respect for the rule of law. And he argued that the rule of law is essential for a well-ordered, prosperous, and thriving society. So beware of those claiming to speak on behalf of the people. Instead, let each politician make their case about what they believe is best and listen. That's what we owe them. But they don't have to speak for all the people. When a politician empowers themselves with the name of the people, beware. Another thing to watch out for is divisive speech. For too long, people who've been trying to get a specific outcome politically have ended up pitting American against American, neighbors against each other. That's awful. That's not what living in this country is about. That's tribalism. It's something that we've long since left behind, and perhaps many of us have forgotten its dangers, but we cannot speak or act in that way. For too long, also, we have been acting like selfish consumers. Selfishness is not the goal of American public life. The thriving of our whole community is the goal. How can you tell if one of the ways that you've been talking or one of the sources of information that you've had is not actually an adequate source of information or a good way of speaking? A way to get a reality check is to notice the effect that your speech and conversation is having on other people. If you find that your relationships, say with friends or with family, are paying the cost of your political views, then something's probably wrong with the information that you're taking in. If your family can't stand to be around you when you open your mouth about politics, then perhaps you are actually a servant of someone's misinformation, of someone's hyperbole, trying to get votes to head in some direction. There are many entities now, unfortunately, happy to feed you information that will upset you to the point that you feel like getting your way is the most important thing, or simply getting your view heard above all other views is everything depends on that. Remain open. Always remain open to views that disagree with your own. This doesn't mean that you have to accept them, but in fact to listen to them, to try to make sense out of them, to understand what has this person got a hold of and what have they not got a hold of. Confirmation bias that we already mentioned can end up make us only take into account things that already fit within our view of the world. But remaining open to views that we disagree with, or even those that offend or upset us, is crucial to being a good citizen. If there are no what we call uncomfortable facts, facts that bother us, that we know about what's happened in something, and we don't quite know how to make them fit in, that's actually a good thing. If you have no uncomfortable facts in your view of the world, you're probably not seeing the whole picture yet. There are very few true stories that are as simple as good guys versus bad guys. And unfortunately, that seems to be the narrative we're often told. There's even a problem, and this was difficult for me to decide to say, but there's even a problem with voting your conscience. Why? Not because conscience is bad, and not because drawing on it or morality is bad when voting, but there are many people out there happy to boil down an election decision to just one issue for many of us. I read an impassioned plea for just that recently. But the impacts of our vote are manifold. There's not just one issue that our vote affects. The impacts of a vote are too complex to boil down ever. And the impacts of the vote are unknown at the time of voting. So don't be a one-issue voter. Don't, quote, just voting my conscience. Think about the candidates for whom you're voting. Do you trust them? Do you think they'll do a good job with the unknowns? Are they someone that you can place the massive power of this country in their hands? We might ask ourselves, why wasn't Noah able to save his generation? Why, like Abraham, didn't he speak up on behalf of his neighbors and save them from the flood? Well, let's be a little more fair-minded. What exactly do you think Noah was supposed to do? How could he have been an influence in a society that was already, as God put it, bent on violence, filled with evil? Was he really supposed to speak up in an age when no one would listen? Perhaps you have a message that you feel that nobody is willing to hear. Perhaps you feel that no one's really getting it. This is actually generally a sign of our isolation. It's the result in large part of technologically driven separations between people. At this moment in time, I would even say it's probably during the pandemic almost inevitable to feel that way. Like no one quite gets it the way you do because our contact is so limited with others. And yet the availability of manifold sources of news, often overly strident and hyperbolic, is greater than before, with more time to consume it. I want to tell you a story from Masechet Shabbat. The Talmud raises a similar question in quite a different context. Regarding another lawless time, the years that led up to the Babylonian destruction of the first temple, we read the following in Masechet Shabbat. Acha ben Rabbi Chanina said, "Never did a favorable word go out from the mouth of the Holy One, blessed be he, of which he then retracted it, replacing it with evil, except the following time, when it's written over there in Yechezkel, and the Lord said unto him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark on the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry out because of all the abominations that are being done in the midst of the city. So mark out for good those men who are crying out about the injustice of their town, Jerusalem. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Gabriel, the angel, right? Go, set a mark of ink upon the foreheads of the righteous, that the destroying angels may have no power over them, and the mark of blood upon the foreheads of the wicked, that the destroying angels may have power over them. Said the attribute of justice before the Holy One. Imagine God's own sort of divine justice personified and speaking. Sovereign of the universe, how are these ones, the righteous, different from those ones? Well, those ones are completely righteous, is the answer, and these ones over here are completely wicked. But the attribute of justice responded, Ribono shel olam, sovereign of the universe, these ones had the power to protest. These did not. God replied, had they protested, someone might have listened to them. Ribono shel olam, justice said, this thing is revealed to you, but was it revealed to them? I.e., how would those who did not speak up know that if they had spoken up, they might have been listened to? Wow. God is willing in that story to turn away the good decree, saving the people of Jerusalem before the Babylonians come and sweep it away, just because they spoke out about the evil. Those individuals would be considered righteous. But what about all those who didn't speak out? And the attribute of divine justice argues with God and says, they're not speaking out. They didn't know anyone would listen to. They only thought it would endanger their lives because the times around them had gotten so crazy that people would hate you for what you said. People would take you to task. People might not employ you. Sound familiar? People might denigrate your good name. And God says, look, if they'd only spoken, people might have listened. But the divine attribute of justice says, you know that because you see all things. But poor mortals, they live in the midst of times they don't know where it's going. They don't know they might be listened to. They have despaired. How do they know? This story primarily raises an incredible question about silence, which is far too often just run roughshod over. We've heard a lot of things about how the silent majority throughout our country's history, we've heard a lot about them from Nixon and on. But we've heard in recent years a lot about how the silent majority are even more nefarious than others. Nonsense. This story comes to say, how do they know they're going to be listened to? To speak, you have to have a ready and willing audience. We are all of us responsible for the decisions that we make because we contribute to the climate in our society of speech. I was fairly disconcerted this week to hear conversations on a reputable news source about changing the laws of free speech. Their ostensible reasons seem to be that social media allows for the fast flow of misinformation, and so you have to check that. How on earth they're going to check that practically, I have no idea. But I have to say, the problem of poor speech is still more speech. It is still displacing poor speech with better speech. Then I heard speculation about changing the constitution of the Supreme Court, as in adding more justices to it. This is deeply short-term thinking. It's totally unacceptable. We need better options than shutting down the speech of others that we deem incorrect. We need to find a speech that connects us, not to shut out speech which offends us. At this time, we are each and every one of us very much like Noah, entering the ark for protection. We try to stay at home as much as possible now in order to limit our exposure to the pandemic, or to work in isolation somewhere else. As we enter our teva, our ark of protection, we must leave a window open to the world. We need to allow our eyes to see the world outside. We need to let the light stream in so that we can see even within our own ark. We cannot ever, even during total cataclysm, merely shut out the outside world entirely. So let it in. Let in the light. Look upon the darkness, but make a window for the ark. The Haftarah today, as if calming, soothing all of our storm-tossed souls, comes from Yeshayahu Nun Daled, teaching, unhappy storm-tossed one, uncomforted, I will lay carbuncles as your building stones, make your foundations as sapphires. I will make your battlements of rubies, and all your children shall be disciples of the Lord, and great then shall be the peace and the happiness of your children. You shall be established throughout generations. You shall be safe from oppression, and you shall have no fear. For ruin shall not come near unto you. Throughout our tradition, we are taught to be disciples of Adonai, disciples of the one who brings peace. May the one who brings peace on high also bring peace here below, especially at this time. And may you, as students of the sages, taught by God, all of us, also bring peace in this world. I want to close by blessing you to bring peace in the world. The sages taught that you can identify students of the sages because they are the ones who make peace. So go forth and make peace. Shabbat Shalom.